Hi everyone, Zip-the-Knee Up Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of this new Fire-Toolz album, Lavender Networks. Here we have a new record and the Warp Records debut from multi-instrumentalist, sound engineer, producer, songwriter, vocalist, Angel Markloyd, aka Fire-Toolz, an experimentalist and multi-talent whose unique fusion of genres set her apart very early on in the vaporwave tape scene where she cut her teeth in the 2010s. She has since gone on to outlast many of her contemporaries from that scene and continues to slowly but steadily grow as an artist, still borrowing very heavily from those 2000s new age progressive electronic music, but mashing that together with some of the most head-scratching genre fusions you could ever imagine. We're talking tracks that bring together elements of IDM, emo, jazz rock, industrial rock, art pop, ambient music, cyber metal, black metal, and much more. And as admirable as I find it that Angel has the ability and bandwidth to be able to bring so many of these sounds together and does it in a way to where her appreciation for these styles comes through really clear, that doesn't mean it always appeals to me though, or comes together in a way that's all that harmonious or cohesive. And for sure there are times when I feel like her sound or tracks could be condensed down a little bit for maybe the sake of going for something that has more of a cohesive focus to it. That being said, I think it's really interesting and quite the endorsement that Warp Records, the godfather of electronic music labels, would seek to platform Angel's work after she's gained more than 10 years of experience at this point. Also, I don't know if it's her having a stronger sense of what Fire-Toolz is now at this point in her career, or maybe it's Lavender Networks being a relatively trim 37 minutes. Could also be my familiarity with Fire-Toolz at this point, given that I've been listening on and off since the days of Interbeing and Eternal Home. But I think this project is one of the most immersive, wondrous, and in a way accessible records I have heard from Angel and Fire-Toolz thus far. And I think it has a lot to do with leaning into the new age electronics and black metal influences that have always been there at the core of Fire-Toolz sound. I would say Lavender Networks really embraces these styles for their sense of space and ambiance. And as versatile as some of these cuts are, it does feel like Angel's making more conscious decisions to ensure each new idea or genre switch up or change comes together more harmoniously, or that these shifts and alterations in sound or mood have more fluid segues. Because the opening track on this record is surprisingly enveloping and quite epic, with these grandiose layers of harmonious synth chords, chugging guitar riffs, sequence drums, and glitches too, all of which create this very mountainous, heavy wall of sound. That is before we are hit with a super quiet, mysterious interlude that eventually ushers in a really quality Zola Jesus appearance that just adds to the otherworldly vibes of this track, of course. And there are plenty more moments on this record that feel like floating through space to one degree or another. But Lavender Networks also features some of the most direct and visceral cuts I think we have heard from Fire-Toolz so far. Dare I call them catchy, like on the song Balam, which kicks off with some really clear grooves and a theme melody that builds up tension really nicely before this totally glitched out freak out with an epic cyber grind crescendo that finishes the whole track off, along with what sounds like some kind of warped sample of a cat purring. One of the many interesting found sounds and textures that are peppered throughout this project. I'm also loving even more the track codenamed Sparkly Lagoon, which no one is going to give the first half of this track the credit it deserves for somehow being heavier than anything Callous Dowboys, Knocked Loose, or even Code Orange have recorded in the last several years, but that's actually what it fucking is. But the subterranean bass and layers of just heavy pounding guitar riffs on this track are just amazing. Then Kiss the Bladed Cat is actually a pretty focused and cohesive composition that's almost giving brooding dungeon synth vibes. But if the synthesizers you were using to track that kind of thing were like something straight out of a PSA from the late 90s about surfing the World Wide Web, complemented with some more heavy chugging guitars, of course. Then I would say touches of industrial metal and glitch converge on the track. A demon and its spinal cord flapping in the wind. Not only is every passage of this track harsh and eerie and an aesthetic mindfuck to boot. But I love what feels like a strange wall of mixed fidelity sounds on this one. In all these layers, you have random tones and noises that are crunched and distorted down into oblivion, hyper crisp synthetics, and weirdly washy sounds that feel like they were lifted from some low quality MP3. There's just so much going on in this track, and again, it's one of several moments here that I would love to hear extended, because for the most part with this track list, you have these longer bookend songs that finish and start the record, while everything else in between kind of varies in different degrees of brevity. The track "And Where Is the Heart," though, is one of the few exceptions. It was a single from the record and features guest vocals from songwriter Jennifer Holm, who brings a strangely blissful and heavenly energy, vocally speaking, to this record. This track is almost like a very pleasing progressive electronic pop oasis in the midst of just all of these crazy genre fusions and strange mutated noise beds. Of course, this is also a hard contrast from the explosive cyber jazz grind on the song, "The Ocean Gratitude Cylinder Peace Necklace Lemonade Flying Free. Never in my life have I said such an assembly of words, and I most likely never will again." And while this is one of the shorter tracks on the record, it does segue very nicely into the following, "Offshore 92, which is more of a transitional moment in this track list, but somehow still one of the heaviest cuts here. It features this booming, decimated beat that just sends shockwaves through the mix like Godzilla stomping down a city street. And at its finish line, it is met with the very blissful sounds of "Pleasant Valley Magic Cube of Holiness, another sentence I'm never going to say," which features vocals from Sling Beam and, again, provides just a very bright, positive sound against a super harsh predecessor track. I do think there is an amazing flow between a lot of the songs that finish this record out in the second half, but that being said, I was a little underwhelmed by the progression of the closer. Not only was this one of the more linear and one-dimensional songs on the record, in my opinion, but I feel like it could have reached a more interesting climax toward the finish too. But even though this record didn't finish as strong as it started, in my opinion, and in addition to that, I will say I was definitely left wanting at least a little bit more. I think trimming things down a little bit and trying to be as punchy and to the point as possible with a lot of these cuts has put Fire-Toolz in a bit of an interesting place creatively, and has caused Angel to pare things down a little bit and figure out what composing and producing in a context, a track list where things need to be more streamlined, what the outcomes of that is. I think that's led to a lot of tracks that are much catchier and more visceral than your average Fire-Toolz album. It's led to genre fusions that I think are a bit more readable and easier to pull apart. It still prevented a bit many of these songs from having more interesting developments, but even if that balancing act isn't being perfectly executed on this project, I still think this is one of the best and most interesting records Fire-Toolz has dropped in quite a long time, which is why I'm feeling a light to decent 7 on this one. Transition, have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Fire-Toolz, forever.